So our new note button over here did clear out the form, but it did not update the URL, which makes me sad. What about clicking on one of these? That populates the form, but does not change the ID. Now, I only have one note right now, so kind of a bad example. So let's see if we can make the new note button do what we want first. Let's have a look at our sidebar. That's where that is, right? This is probably complicated to be its own component, but we won't do that just yet. You know how to do it if you want to. But it almost certainly is. So what it does now is call reset current note when we click it. What I really want to do is just link to /notes. Then there won't be an ID in the title. And then we want to make the form figure that out. Aha, I have no ID in the title. I should clear the form out. I want this to be simple. I don't want this to have to know about all of that state stuff. I just want it to know what URL it should go to. So I'm going to do this kind of a funny way, but let's wrap the button in a link. How's that? So in order to use link, we're going to have to import it, right? Import link. That is a named import, so curly braces from React router DOM. And we'll say link to /notes. So why did I use link instead of navlink? Because active doesn't really make a whole lot of sense here. When you're on the new page, you don't want that plus button to show any differently. It's not going to be a different color or anything, so I don't need navlink. Let's see what we get. I still have my on click here. Oh boy, we get a teeny tiny button. Well, we can deal with that. Let's worry about making this thing work. If I click that, oh yeah, we still have our on click here. We're cheating. We don't want to do that. We just want to link. All right. Let's go back to the version that has the node ID in there. Now let's click the plus button. So now it changed the URL, but did not change the form. It didn't update current note. We don't want it to do that. That's the form's job. So first of all, now that I'm not calling reset current note from inside sidebar, I don't need it in here anymore, right? I don't need to break it out of my props. So I don't need to pass it in as a prop. So if you go to main where we call sidebar, we don't need reset current note anymore. So this can get shorter. Sweet. So what happens when we redirect to /notes? Let's look at note form. Okay. Const new ID, blah, blah, blah. If the new ID is not equal to the ID of the current note, then try to find a note called that. And if you find it, set it. What if you don't? That's what we're not handling. What if that note doesn't exist? What if there is no ID for that matter? So we could say if new ID and new ID not equal to this.props.current node ID. We kind of need that to be a separate thing. Because if it does match the current ID, we don't want to blank it out, right? So we could say if note, set the current ID to that one. If not, I guess we want to blank it out, basically, right? But I still don't think this is going to work quite the way I want. We'll see. So I think this.props.reset current note. I can't remember if that's being passed as a prop to this one. I think it is. Yeah, main is passing everything to note form. So again, if the new ID is not equal to the old ID, then try to find the note with that ID. Failing that, reset the current note. Because you've got a bogus ID up there. Possibly you've got an ID for a note that doesn't belong to you. Either way, it should blank it out. But something worse is happening. Explode! Maximum call stack size exceeded. It's calling something over and over and over. Let's refresh. Explode, maximum call size exceeded. So React thankfully stops us from infinite loops eventually. If it calls the same thing over and over and over, it pretty quickly says maximum call stack size exceeded. So what's happening? No matter what now, we're changing the current node. Which, guess what? Changes our props. Which, guess what? Runs component will receive props again. And no matter what it was, it's going to call one of these two things again. So no matter what, we're just going to keep calling this forever. So this isn't how we want to handle this situation. I know, right? So if the new ID does equal the current one, it shouldn't do that. So let's see what the current ID. Well, if I'm at /notes, what's the current ID? I mean, what's the new ID out of next props match params ID? Undefined, right? That won't be there. That parameter won't be there at all. So that's never going to equal this ID. Heck, even if it's null, because this starts out as null in a blank note, but null isn't equal to undefined. Not quite. So we could do this. As soon as we get this, we could check if that's even there. If new ID, then do all this stuff. If the new ID isn't even there at all, then we want a blank note, right? But we don't want a blank note over and over for all time. I know. Whoever sighed heavily, I know. So that should reset current note. We just moved the else. Let's see what happens now. Should that be any better? It's still maximum call size exceeded. Refresh the page. Nope. Yep. Maximum call size exceeded. So let's think about this. Under what circumstances do we not want to change what the current node is? If the ID is already the same thing that was passed in as a param, or if nothing was passed in as a param and the note's already blank. if nothing was passed in as a param, we could be moving from an ID is in there to an ID is not, in which case we want to reset it, right? So right now, this else is handling the case where we are visiting just slash notes. When is it important that we call reset current note when we visit that? If there's already a different note in the form. Otherwise, we don't need to bother resetting it. It's already blank. So what if we did this? Else if this dot props, not next props, dot current note dot ID. Current note dot ID. Then reset current note wouldn't run if there was no new ID, but there already wasn't an existing node in the form. We don't need to call reset current note again. It's already been reset. It's already a brand new node. This could be a lot more readable. I hate this code. If, ugh, way too much indentation. But it seems like it'll work. Let's see. Refresh. Okay, no more infinity. If we click this one to visit that note, yeah, the ID didn't change. So let's back up so the ID is set. Okay. The ID is set. The note's loaded in the form. I click plus. The route updates, and the form gets cleared out. And it doesn't do an infinite loop. You dig? See why? So if there is a new ID, then we're visiting the page with slash some ID, slash notes slash some ID. In which case, we just need to check whether that ID is the one we've already got loaded. If it's not the one we've already got loaded, then try to grab the note with that ID, and if that's valid, make that the current note. But if there was no ID in the params at all, if we're just visiting slash notes, then how do we decide whether we want to blank out the form? See if it's already blank. So if there is a current node ID, then we need to reset the node. Otherwise, it's already blank. I don't need to blank it again, or I'll just keep blanking it for eternity. Cool? Seems like the one thing we haven't handled here is the else of this. So this means the ID did change. It's not what it was before, but there is no note with that ID. So right now what it does is just leave the form alone. Let's try it. Let's load up this one. I need to use my URL. Okay, we've got a URL here. We've got a note loaded up. And I change my URL to some nonsense. Oh, it blanked it out. But I'm still at slash notes slash nonsense. That's no good. I don't want to be at a URL for something, a resource that doesn't exist. So I should probably redirect to just slash notes under those circumstances. Does that make sense? How do we do that? Remember that history object that you could push? Do you? If you just wanted to change your route without using a component, because this isn't JSX here, I can't just say redirect to. I could say else this.props.history.push slash notes. Right? I've got a fake note. I want this to reflect that. All right, let's go back to where we have, aha, it's doing it. Let's get this ID again. I lost it. Note, ID is this. Let's visit that. Oh, it redirected me to notes when I didn't want it to. It's hitting the else here, as though next prop notes new ID weren't a thing. How is that? Maybe that hasn't actually, maybe the state hasn't actually been loaded yet. Because that Firebase syncs that and loads the notes, right? So I think we have another race condition. If we reach this line before Firebase has finished syncing, it may not find that note. Now it'll try again the next time our props are updated. Problem is, we'll have already redirected by that time. So this could be a little trickier. So we could check if new ID is not equal to this one and the notes have finished loading. So we could say this.prop dot. How can we even check that? So notes is our thing, right? How can we check whether that has anything in it? Whether that has any keys? This is getting way too complicated, but what about object.keys / this.props.notes .length greater than 0 or something? Because the keys inside there will be the IDs, right? If there's nothing in there, then maybe I don't want it making this check just yet. I mean, maybe there are really no notes. But hopefully they're not visiting something /ID if that's the case. This could be kind of hard to nail down. So let's again go to / blah blah blah. Okay, it didn't redirect me this time, but it didn't load the note either. That's probably the wrong ID. Note. Yeah, that was the wrong ID. Well, it didn't load it. Oh, it's next props. Anyway, next props. Not that that should totally keep it from working, but now it loaded it up. Okay. If I visit a fake one, it does redirect me. Do you understand what's happening? Basically, it makes sure that we've at least loaded the darn things and that we have some notes before it decides, oh, well, there's not that thing, I should redirect. But I could also put this check down there. Still make this really, this is getting really complicated. But we could say else if, just to make sure that we haven't just failed to finish loading yet. But really, we want some way to keep this stuff from happening, from it even trying these things until Firebase is finished. But we haven't learned a way to check that yet. For right now, that seems like a reasonable way to handle this, except that the code's ugly. Okay, so if we go straight to that URL for that note, it loads the note. If I go to just /notes, I get a blank note. If I go to a made up ID, it redirects me to /notes. If I have a real note loaded up and I hit plus, it redirects me and it blanks it out. Good. What about deleting? Well, let's get more than one before we start throwing things away. Let's start typing a new note. What? Oh man, we're doing this thing again where we create a new note every time we hit the button. Well, shucks. Still, we've made some major progress here. What have we done since the last commit? The last commit was populate the form based on the ID and the route. Well, we fixed this button, right? I mean, it's tiny, but we fixed it. That was the main thing we were trying to accomplish. Link to a blank. Make the sidebar button a link to a blank note. And then deal with some edge cases.